A Ukrainian drone has turned the Syzran refinery into a blazing disaster, hitting the heart of Russia's energy network. Here's what went down, and why it's a game changer. On the night of December 5, 2025, the dark winter sky over the Samara region of Russia was violently illuminated by a column of fire that signaled a catastrophic shift in the trajectory of modern warfare. The Syzran refinery, a crown jewel in Rosneft's massive petrochemical empire and a vital artery for the Russian military machine, was not just hit. It was systematically dismantled by a weapon that has redefined the concept of strategic dominance. This was not a random act of harassment or a symbolic gesture. It was a precision decapitation of Russia's economic lifeline, executed by the Ukrainian armed forces using technology that has rendered Moscow's vaunted air defense systems obsolete. The inferno that consumed the AVT-6 primary crude distillation unit did more than just burn millions of dollars of hydrocarbons. It incinerated the myth of Russian invulnerability and exposed a $3 billion nightmare that Vladimir Putin cannot wake up from. To understand the magnitude of this event, one must look beyond the flames and into the cold, hard data of what was achieved. The Syzran facility is not merely a factory. It is a fortress of energy production, processing over 8.9 million tons of crude oil annually. It sits deep within Russian territory, some 700 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, a distance that Russian military planners once believed granted them immunity from tactical strikes. For decades, the doctrine was simple. Ukraine has no navy, no long-range missile force capable of reaching the Volga, and no air force that could penetrate the layered defense of the S-300 and S-400 batteries guarding the Russian interior. That doctrine died on December 5th. The strike effectively severed the facility's ability to process crude oil, knocking out the primary distillation column, the heart of the refinery, without which the rest of the complex is essentially a useless collection of pipes and tanks. The weapon of choice for this dismantling was the Lyuty, or Fierce, a Ukrainian-made long-range drone that has become the single most effective tool of asymmetric warfare in the 21st century. While the world focused on the stalemate in the trenches of the Donbass, Ukrainian engineers were quietly revolutionizing the physics of the battlefield. The Lyuty is not a repurposed hobbyist toy. It is a purpose-built strategic bomber in miniature. With a wingspan of 6.7 meters and a range exceeding 1,000 kilometers, it carries a 75-kilogram warhead designed specifically to penetrate the unarmored but critical infrastructure of industrial plants. But the true terror for the Russian Ministry of Defense lies not in the drone's explosive power, but in its brain. The December strike on Syzran showcased the terrifying maturity of Ukrainian guidance systems. Early in the war, drones relied heavily on GPS, which Russian electronic warfare units could jam or spoof, sending the aircraft harmlessly into fields. The new generation of Lyuty drones, however, utilizes the Skynode S system, a machine vision navigation unit that operates completely independently of satellite signals. This system uses an onboard camera and a stored library of satellite imagery to look at the ground below, comparing landmarks in real time to determine its position with pinpoint accuracy. It is the same principle used by the American Tomahawk cruise missile, but achieved at a fraction of the cost using off-the-shelf processors and advanced AI algorithms. When the Russian electronic warfare units in Samara turned on their jammers on the night of December 5th, blinding civilian GPS across the region, the Ukrainian drones simply switched to optical navigation and kept flying. They were ghost ships, invisible to the electronic spectrum, and unstoppable by the frantic attempts to confuse them. The impact of the Syzran strike is immediate and devastatingly expensive. Industry experts estimate that the physical repairs alone will take at least a month, but the true cost is exponential. The AVT-6 unit is a complex piece of engineering, often relying on Western components that are now strictly sanctioned. Russia cannot simply order a replacement part from Siemens or Honeywell. They must scour the black market, cannibalize other refineries, or attempt to manufacture inferior copies domestically. Every day the refinery sits idle, Rosneft loses millions in revenue, but the state loses something far more valuable: diesel fuel. Syzran was a primary supplier of diesel for the Russian military. A tank battalion does not run on crude oil. It runs on refined diesel. By taking this single facility offline, Ukraine has effectively severed the fuel lines for thousands of armored vehicles on the front lines, forcing Russian logistics officers to reroute supplies from thousands of kilometers away, stretching an already breaking supply chain to its absolute limit. This is the essence of the sanctions by force strategy. Western economic sanctions were designed to slowly bleed the Russian economy, but they were leaky and slow. Ukraine's drone campaign is the kinetic equivalent of a total embargo, enforced not by diplomats in Brussels, but by high explosives in Samara. The Syzran attack was part of a coordinated wave that also targeted the Temryuk port and other energy infrastructure, revealing a level of operational synchronization that rivals the most advanced NATO militaries. Ukraine is not just launching drones, they are orchestrating complex air raids that overwhelm Russian defenses through saturation and deception. They launch decoys to light up Russian radars, forcing the S-400 batteries to expend multi-million-dollar missiles on cheap fiberglass tubes, while the real killers, the Lyuty drones, slip through the gaps, flying low and silent toward their targets. The psychological impact on the Russian populace and leadership cannot be overstated. For years, the Kremlin has sold a narrative of total control, assuring its citizens that the special military operation was a distant affair that would not touch their daily lives. The burning towers of Syzran, visible for miles and captured on thousands of smartphones, shattered that lie. The drone war has brought the conflict home to the Russian heartland. It has proven that there is no Kiev harbor, no rear area, and no strategic depth that Ukraine cannot reach. When a refinery in the Volga region burns, the price of gasoline at the pump in Moscow rises. The ban on gasoline exports, which Russia was forced to implement earlier in the year to prevent domestic shortages, is a direct result of this campaign. It is a humiliation for a self-proclaimed energy superpower to be unable to fuel its own cars because a smaller, supposedly weaker adversary has systematically picked apart its production capacity. The verified data from this campaign paints a picture of a Russian defense sector in total disarray. By late 2025, Ukraine had successfully targeted over 30 major Russian refineries and oil terminals. The cumulative effect has been a reduction in Russia's refining capacity by approximately 15 to 20%. This may sound like a manageable percentage, But in the tight margins of the global energy market, it is catastrophic. It forces Russia to export more crude oil at a discount, since they cannot refine it, while simultaneously importing refined fuel at a premium to meet domestic and military needs. It is a dual financial blow, selling low and buying high. The $3 billion nightmare is a conservative estimate when one factors in the lost export revenue, the cost of emergency fuel imports, the corruption-inflated repair contracts, and the localized inflation that follows every fuel shortage. Furthermore, the Syzran strike exposes the hollowness of Russia's air defense reputation. The Panzer S-1 systems, designed specifically to protect point targets like refineries from drones, have failed repeatedly. On December 5th, despite heightened alert levels and the previous attack in August, the Ukrainian drones still got through. This failure suggests a systemic inability to detect and engage small, low-flying, composite material targets. The Russian radar network is built to see B-52 bombers and high-altitude fighters, not a 300-kilogram drone hugging the treetops. To defend every refinery, depot, and factory in Russia would require more air defense systems than exist in the entire world. Ukraine has forced Russia into an impossible dilemma: pull air defense systems from the front lines to protect the refineries, thereby leaving their troops vulnerable to HIMARS and F-16s, or leave the refineries exposed and watch their economy burn. The strike on Syzran proves that Russia has chosen the latter, sacrificing their long-term economic viability in a desperate attempt to hold ground in the Donbass. The geopolitical ramifications of this dominance are profound. Throughout 2024 and 2025, there were reports of American officials urging Ukraine to halt strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, fearing a spike in global oil prices that could destabilize the Western economy. Ukraine's response has been a defiant acceleration of the campaign. The logic is sound. If Russia is using energy earnings to fund the genocide of the Ukrainian people, then that energy infrastructure is a legitimate military target. The December 5th strike demonstrates that Kyiv is now operating with a level of strategic autonomy that commands respect. They have calculated that the degradation of the Russian war machine is worth the risk of diplomatic friction. And the market has largely absorbed the shock, because Ukraine targets refineries which make fuel rather than extraction wells, which produce crude A. The global supply of crude oil remains stable, while Russia's ability to profit from it is strangled. It is a masterclass in economic warfare, threading the needle between hurting the enemy and protecting the global market. The evolution of the Ukrainian drone program into a strategic force has also fundamentally altered the naval balance, which is inextricably linked to the energy war. The recent strikes on the Caspian Sea oil platforms, the first of their kind, show that Ukraine is expanding the theater of operations even further. The Caspian was considered a Russian lake, a safe zone for launching missiles and transporting oil. Now, it is a combat zone. The Lyuty drones, with their extended range, can now threaten the Caspian flotilla and the offshore rigs that pump oil from the seabed. This expansion stretches Russian defenses even thinner. They simply cannot cover the Black Sea, the Baltic Sea, the vast Ukrainian front, the Moscow region, and now the Caspian industrial basin simultaneously. By igniting Syzran, Ukraine has signaled that the entire map of Russia is now a grid of potential targets. Let us look closer at the specific timeline of the Syzran disaster to understand the dominance aspect. The refinery was hit in August 2025. It took 2 weeks to patch the damage. Rosneft likely spent millions on emergency repairs and moved air defense assets to the area. Then, on December 5th, Ukraine hit the exact same unit again. This is the military definition of dominance: the ability to strike a target, watch the enemy repair it, and then strike it again at a time of your choosing, proving that the enemy is powerless to stop you. It sends a message of total helplessness to the Russian workforce. Why go to work at the refinery if it's just going to be blown up again next week? The morale of the skilled labor force in the Russian energy sector is plummeting, with reports of workers demanding hazard pay or quitting entirely to move to safer regions. The brain drain from these facilities is a slower, but equally deadly form of damage. The $3 billion figure associated with this nightmare scenario is composed of several layers of loss. First is the direct physical damage to the AVT-6 unit and surrounding infrastructure, which could run into the hundreds of millions given the inflated cost of sanctioned components. Second is the production downtime. 90,000 barrels per day of processing capacity halted for a month means nearly 3 million barrels of crude sitting uselessly in storage, clogging the pipelines upstream. Third is the logistical cost of replacing that fuel for the military and the local market. Russia must now transport fuel by rail from refineries in Siberia or the Urals, paying enormous freight costs and clogging the already overburdened Trans-Siberian Railway network. Fourth is the environmental cleanup and the long-term degradation of the plant's efficiency. Rapid shutdowns and fires damage the catalysts and the structural integrity of the refining towers, leading to lower yields even after the plant comes back online. Moreover, the drone war is a war of attrition that heavily favors Ukraine. A Lyuty drone costs roughly $50,000 to $100,000 to manufacture. A Russian S-400 interceptor missile costs nearly $2 million. The AVT-6 distillation column costs hundreds of millions to build. If Ukraine launches 10 drones and 9 are shot down, but 1 gets through and hits the refinery, Ukraine has spent $1 million to inflict $100 million in damage. This is a cost-exchange ratio of 1:100. There is no economy in the world, let alone a sanctioned and isolated one like Russia's, that can sustain a war with that kind of negative leverage. Ukraine is bankrupting the Russian war effort one drone at a time. The Syzran inferno is the physical manifestation of this math. The technological leap represented by the Lyuty and its AI integration also places Ukraine at the forefront of military innovation globally. While Russia relies on Iranian-designed Shahed drones, which are crude and noisy, Ukraine is developing indigenous stealth technologies and terminal guidance systems that are rewriting the textbooks. The sheer volume of production is also staggering. Ukrainian officials have committed to producing 1 million drones in 2025, even if only a fraction of these are long-range strike variants. It represents a swarm capability that no air defense network in history has ever faced. The Syzran attack was likely executed by a wolf pack of drones, communicating with each other to overwhelm the defenses. This is the future of war, and Ukraine is the first nation to master it at scale. We must also consider the silence of Rosneft. In the aftermath of the December 5th strike, the company issued no statement, offered no timeline, and released no photos. This silence is deafening. It indicates that the damage is severe and that the Kremlin has issued a gag order to prevent panic. In an open society, Companies report on accidents and recovery timelines. In a failing, authoritarian state, they hide the truth. But in the age of satellite imagery and social media, the truth cannot be hidden. Commercial satellites verify the scorch marks and the cessation of heat plumes from the refinery stacks. The open-source intelligence community has already assessed the damage, and the verdict is clear. Syzran is out of the fight for the foreseeable future. The strategic brilliance of targeting Syzran also lies in its location on the Volga River. The river is a key transport artery for oil products moving south to the Black Sea and north to the industrial heartland. By disrupting the refinery, Ukraine disrupts the barge traffic and the rail lines that converge there. It creates a bottleneck that ripples through the entire Russian economy. Farmers in the fertile southern regions face diesel shortages during harvest. Factories in the Urals face power shortages. The war is no longer contained to the new territories or the border blasts. It is being felt in the bank accounts and gas tanks of ordinary Russians, eroding the passive support that Putin relies on to continue the war. As we analyze the current state of the conflict in late 2025, it becomes evident that while the land war may appear static, the strategic war is dynamic and decisively in Ukraine's favor. Russia has run out of answers. They have tried jamming, and Ukraine switched to optical navigation. They tried building cages around refineries, and Ukraine developed tandem charge warheads to punch through them. They tried moving air defenses, and Ukraine simply gathered intelligence on the new gaps and exploited them. It is a game of cat and mouse, where the mouse has grown wings, learned to see in the dark, and carries high explosives. The Syzran refinery inferno is a microcosm of the entire war. It represents a nimble, innovative, and determined Ukraine striking a blow against a bloated, rigid, and resource-dependent Russia. It shows that size does not equal strength, and that oil reserves are a liability if you cannot protect the facilities that process them. The $3 billion nightmare is not just about money. It is about the loss of control. Vladimir Putin can command his generals to take a village in Donetsk at the cost of 10,000 lives. But he cannot command the fire at Syzran to stop burning. He cannot command the insurance companies to cover the losses of a war zone asset. He cannot command the global market to ignore the instability of Russian supply. Ukraine's dominance is further evidenced by the helplessness of the Russian response. Following the Syzran attack, the Russian Ministry of Defense claimed to have shot down dozens of drones. Yet the video evidence of the burning refinery circulated globally. This disparity between official claims and reality erodes the credibility of the state. It forces the Russian population to question the competence of their protectors. If the army cannot protect a strategic asset worth billions in the middle of the country, how can it protect the citizens? This erosion of trust is a slow-acting poison that is arguably more dangerous to the regime than the loss of the fuel itself. The long-range sanctions campaign, as Ukrainian officials have dubbed it, is the most successful strategic bombing campaign since the Second World War, but achieved without a single bomber aircraft. It disrupts the enemy's economy without flattening cities. It targets the sinews of war, fuel and money, directly. The Syzran refinery, with its charred distillation columns and silent machinery, stands as a monument to this new era. It is a warning to every other refinery manager in Russia. You are next. There is no defense that can stop a swarm of AI-guided Lyuti drones. The only variable is when Ukraine decides to strike. In conclusion, the December 5th attack on the Syzran refinery is a defining moment that crystallizes Ukraine's dominant position in the strategic phase of the war. By leveraging low-cost, high-tech domestic drones, Ukraine has held Russia's most valuable economic assets hostage. The $3 billion impact of this single event contributes to a death by 1,000 cuts for the Russian economy, stripping away the revenue needed to sustain the invasion and the fuel needed to power it. While the maps of the front line may show slow changes, the map of Russia's energy infrastructure shows a rapidly spreading darkness. Ukraine has proven that it does not need to match Russia. Tank for tank, it only needs to burn the fuel that makes those tanks move. And in the fires of Syzran, we see the future of the war. A relentless, precise, and unstoppable dismantling of the Russian state, orchestrated from Kyiv. This dominance extends beyond the physical destruction. It is an information victory. Every video of a Russian refinery burning is a boost to Ukrainian morale and a blow to Russian confidence. It demonstrates to the Western allies that their investment in Ukraine is yielding tangible, strategic results. It shows that Ukraine is not just surviving, it is evolving and striking back with a ferocity and sophistication that the Kremlin never anticipated. The Syzran refinery is now a symbol of Russian vulnerability and Ukrainian ingenuity, a beacon of fire that signals the beginning of the end for Russia's energy dominance and, ultimately, its ability to wage war. The relentless nature of these attacks also forces a recalibration of global energy security. Nations that once relied on stable Russian exports are now diversifying at record speed, permanently shutting Russia out of markets it once controlled. Even when the war ends, the Syzran refinery may never regain its former status. The customers will have moved on. The technology will be outdated. The capital to rebuild will be non-existent. Ukraine is not just destroying the refinery for today. They are destroying Russia's economic future for decades. As the smoke clears over the Volga, the reality of the situation sets in. The Lyuty drone has proven itself to be one of the most consequential weapons of the decade. Syzran is broken. The $3 billion bill is due, and Russia has no way to pay it. Ukraine controls the tempo, the target selection, and the intensity of this economic war. And as long as Russian troops remain on Ukrainian soil, the refineries will keep burning. The nightmare is far from over. In fact, with the new production targets for 2026, it is only just beginning. The dominant force in this war is the one that can adapt, innovate, and strike the enemy where it hurts them most. On the night of December 5th, over the skies of Syzran, Ukraine proved without a shadow of a doubt that it is that force. The operational details of the strike reveal a deep understanding of the refinery's anatomy. The drones did not hit the storage tanks, which would produce a spectacular but ultimately manageable fire. They hit the distillation towers, the complex pressurized columns that separate crude oil into its component fractions. These towers are the bottleneck of the entire process. They are custom-built, difficult to transport, and impossible to bypass. By targeting the AVT-6 unit, Ukraine demonstrated a level of industrial intelligence that is terrifying to Russian planners. They know exactly which valve to turn, which pipe to cut, and which column to topple to bring the entire machine to a halt. This is not spray and pray. This is surgical amputation. Furthermore, the timing of the strike, deep in winter, maximizes the pain. Russia needs diesel not just for tanks, but for heating, for plowing snow, for transporting food. A fuel shortage in December is exponentially more dangerous than one in July. It strains the social fabric of the country. It forces the government to choose between freezing citizens and stalled tanks. By hitting Syzran now, Ukraine is weaponizing the Russian winter against Russia itself, turning their historical ally, General Winter, into a liability. The failure of the Russian military to adapt to this threat after nearly 2 years of refinery strikes is a damning indictment of their command structure. They remain rigid, hierarchical, and slow. In contrast, the Ukrainian drone forces are decentralized, agile, and constantly iterating. They change frequencies, flight paths, and warhead compositions faster than the Russians can write a report about the last attack. This disparity in OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, speed is why Ukraine is winning the strategic war. They are simply thinking and acting faster than their adversary. In the final analysis, the Syzran refinery inferno is a case study in how a smaller nation can bring a superpower to its knees. It is a lesson in the power of technology, intelligence, and will. The $3 billion cost is a staggering sum, but the loss of perceived invincibility is priceless. Ukraine has turned the skies over Russia into a danger zone, and the engines of Russia's economy into liabilities. The dominant force has spoken, and its voice is the roar of a burning refinery in the heart of Russia. The Skynote S system deserves a more granular examination to fully appreciate why it is a game changer. Traditional drone guidance relies on GNSS, global navigation satellite systems, like GPMIPO, GLONASS, or Galileo. These signals are weak and easily drowned out by high-power jamming stations, which Russia has deployed in abundance around strategic sites. The Skynote S, however, uses optical flow and terrain reference navigation. It carries a high-definition camera and a powerful onboard computer loaded with a 3D map of the flight path. As it flies, it compares what it sees to what it knows. If the map says there should be a river bend and a railway crossing, and the camera sees them, the drone knows exactly where it is, regardless of whether the GPS signal says it's in Moscow or Antarctica. This capability renders the expensive Russian Pol 21 and ZTEL jamming stations effectively useless against the Lyuty. The Russians are broadcasting noise into the ether, while the Ukrainian drones are navigating with their eyes. This technological dominance is compounded by the sheer scale of the Russian geography. The distance from the Ukrainian border to Syzran is roughly 700 to 800 kilometers. To cover this distance, the drone must fly for several hours. In the past, this long flight time gave Russian air defense ample opportunity to track and intercept. But the Lyuty flies low, often below 50 meters, using the curvature of the Earth and the terrain masking of forests and hills to hide from long-range radar. It pops up only in the final terminal phase to dive onto the target. The Russian radar network, designed for high-altitude threats, is full of holes at low altitude. Ukraine has mapped these holes using NATO intelligence and their own reconnaissance, creating corridors of safe airspace that funnel the drones deep into the Russian rear. The rail network disruption is the secondary, often overlooked catastrophe caused by the Syzran strike. The refinery is serviced by a spur of the Kuibyshev Railway, a critical segment of the Trans-Siberian line. When the refinery is operating, thousands of tanker cars move in and out every month. With production halted, the flow of cars stops, but the scheduling chaos ripples outward. Empty cars pile up in sidings. Locomotives scheduled to haul fuel are left idle or must be hastily reassigned. The complex ballet of Russian rail logistics which is already strained by the movement of troops and ammunition to Ukraine, begins to stumble. A delay in fuel shipments from Syzran means a depot in Rostov runs dry. A dry depot in Rostov means a truck convoy destined for the Zaporizhia front cannot move. The domino effect is real, and it starts with a single drone impact in Samara. Moreover, the financial instruments Russia uses to mitigate these losses are evaporating. The National Wealth Fund, Russia's rainy day piggy bank, has been drained to cover the budget deficit created by the war. There is no surplus cash to bail out Rosneft or to subsidize the high cost of imported fuel. The $3 billion loss at Syzran must be absorbed by the company or passed on to the consumer. If passed to the consumer, inflation spikes. If absorbed by the company, dividends to the state cut, and Rosneft is a major taxpayer. Either way, the Russian state budget bleeds. Ukraine understands this financial ecosystem intimately. They are not just bombing buildings, they are attacking the balance sheet of the Russian Federation. As the winter of 2025 deepens, the Syzran refinery remains a blackened, silent husk. The snow around it is stained with soot. The workers are at home, unpaid or on reduced wages. The air defense crews are scanning the skies, exhausted and paranoid, waiting for the next hum of a lawnmower engine that signals another disaster. And in a command bunker in Ukraine, young operators are already programming the flight paths for the next wave, targeting the next refinery, the next port, the next billion-dollar asset. The message is clear. Ukraine is the dominant force. The initiative belongs to Kiev. And for Russia, the nightmare is only getting darker. The psychological dimension of this dominance extends to the sovereignty of the Russian airspace. A nation that cannot control its own skies cannot claim to be a great power. The fact that Ukrainian drones can travel about 800 kilometers through the heart of Russia, unchallenged until the final moments, is a total failure of the Russian aerospace forces. It invites mockery from rivals and fear from allies. Central Asian nations, watching Syzran burn, reconsider their reliance on Russian security guarantees. If Russia cannot protect its own oil, how can it protect Kazakhstan or Armenia? The geopolitical gravity of the region shifts away from Moscow, pulled by the vacuum created by Ukrainian drones. Even the narrative of the Great Patriotic War, which Putin uses to mobilize support, is undermined. In World War II, the Soviet rear was the sanctuary of production. Now, the rear is the front line. There is no sanctuary. The cognitive dissonance for the average Russian is growing. They are told they are winning, yet their refineries are exploding. They are told their technology is superior, yet they are being beaten by flying mopeds. This cognitive gap is where political instability takes root. Ukraine is cultivating this instability with every strike. As we look toward 2026, the implications of the Syzran strike suggest a grim future for the Russian energy sector. If Ukraine maintains this tempo, Russia could become a net importer of gasoline. This would be an economic catastrophe of historic proportions. It would destroy the ruble, obliterate the balance of payments, and likely lead to rationing. The gas station with nukes would be out of gas. This is the ultimate goal of the Ukrainian strategy: demilitarize Russia by demonetizing it. And with every refinery that burns, they get one step closer. The Syzran inferno is not just a fire, it is a beacon of Ukraine's impending victory in the war of attrition. Syzran isn't just damaged, it's a warning. Ukraine's reach is growing. and Russia's energy lifelines are now exposed like never before.